BBC World News, I'm Sally Bundock. Our top stories. President Trump brushes aside opposition to his temporary immigration ban. He insists it's to protect American workers. The UN warns the pandemic could almost double the number of people suffering from acute hunger. A plane carrying vital safety equipment for healthcare workers has finally arrived in the UK after a series of delays. Germany pledges to continue an aggressive programme of testing and tracing as its COVID-19 restrictions are partially relaxed. And it's a win-win for Netflix. Millions more subscribe as we binge on box sets during the lockdown. President Trump has outlined more measures to try to curb the spread of the coronavirus in the US and help smaller businesses hit hard by the lockdown. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo, fresh from a meeting at the White House, has said further federal funding would be provided to ensure more aid is available and testing is carried out. In Spain, Parliament will decide if the lockdown should be extended for a further 2 weeks. And the first batch of personal protective equipment from Turkey has finally arrived in the UK after a lot of delay and confusion. More on all that in a moment, but first, here's Peter Bowes talking about Donald Trump's plans for suspending immigration.
An economy paralysed because of COVID-19. The US unemployment rate has skyrocketed at a pace never seen before. 22 million Americans have lost their jobs over the past month. President Trump says his prime objective is to ensure those unemployed Americans get their jobs back as soon as possible.
It would be wrong and unjust for Americans laid off by the virus to be replaced with new immigrant labor flown in from abroad. We must first take care of the American worker, take care of the American worker.
He said immigration would be put on pause for 60 days for people seeking green cards, permanent residency in the United States. There would then be a review of the decision based on the economic conditions at the time. The ban will not apply to people entering the US on a temporary basis. Farm workers, those helping to secure US food supplies, and workers responding to the coronavirus. Help is also on the way for more small businesses, with a nearly $500 billion package of measures to make it easier for firms to keep workers on the payroll during the economic shutdown, which the president believes will soon be over. In a separate development, the state of Missouri is suing China for its handling of the coronavirus outbreak. A lawsuit alleges that Chinese officials were responsible for the enormous death, suffering and economic losses they inflicted on the world. A crucial element to reopening the economy is coronavirus testing, something the governor of New York has been urging the president to step up. After a meeting with Mr. Trump at the White House, Andrew Cuomo said a deal had been reached to increase testing capacity in New York.
To quantify that situation in the state of New York, we now do on average of about 20,000 tests per day. Our goal, which is very aggressive and ambitious, but set it high and then try, our goal is to double the 20,000 to get to 40,000 tests per day. That's our goal, and it was a very productive conversation.
The governor and the president also agreed that New York no longer needed a US Navy hospital ship, which was sent there to ease the burden on city hospitals. The ship, Comfort, will return to its base in Virginia in case it's needed for other locations around the country. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Now, the Spanish Parliament will decide today whether to extend its national lockdown for a further 2 weeks. Spain has one of the highest rates of COVID-19 infections in the world, but the number of daily deaths has fallen. Our correspondent Guy Hedgecoe is in Madrid for us. Guy, just tell us more about what the Parliament is likely to decide.
Well, we expect Parliament to approve Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's proposal today to extend the lockdown by another 2 weeks. This is the third extension that he is requesting of Parliament. It will last, if it is approved, that lockdown will last until May the 10th. We believe he will get enough support there. What we don't know is what will happen after May the 10th, if he will try and extend the lockdown again, or simply lift the lockdown altogether. He hasn't said yet what his plans are, but we do believe that this will be extended at least until the middle of May.
In the meantime, Spain is calling on its European neighbours to unite behind a joint EU rescue fund for all the economies impacted. Of course, Spain hugely impacted by this pandemic. How are those negotiations going?
Well, Pedro Sanchez has been right at the centre of this, and he sees a united European response to COVID-19 as absolutely essential, particularly when it comes to the economy. I think he's very concerned about the impact on the Spanish economy, with memories of the recent Eurozone crisis from just a decade ago still very fresh here in Spain. He wants a united response. What he said, he doesn't want to see a sort of divide between Northern Europe and Southern Europe, the kind of divide that we did see a decade ago or so with the Eurozone crisis. He wants very much to see a response which is a shared responsibility, so those countries which are perhaps less affected to share some of the burden with those which are most affected. But still, I think those negotiations are ongoing, and they're looking quite tough at the moment.
I can imagine. Thank you, Guy, for the latest from Spain. Well, let's have a look then at some of the other day's stories. Italy's Prime Minister says he will not compromise on his desire to see the European Union share debts brought on by the pandemic, despite opposition from Germany and the Netherlands. Finance ministers say they're prepared to agree a recovery package worth €500 billion. In France, visitors are being allowed in some care homes. Many residents have not been able to see relatives and friends for the last 7 weeks. Social distancing measures still have to be observed, and strict health protocols need to be followed to allow limited meetings. US and European oil markets remain extremely volatile as the coronavirus causes a major drop in demand. Prices staged a significant recovery when Asian markets opened to reach positive figures. The UN's World Food Programme has warned of famines of biblical proportions because of the coronavirus outbreak. The agency estimates the number of people going hungry could double to more than 250 million. Here's our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette.
Queues in a Kabul lockdown. Not for medicine to fight the deadly virus, for sacks of wheat to fight hunger. The poorest now deprived of daily wages to survive. No one would help you if you stay home, this woman says. I cried for the last 2 to 3 days. Whoever talks to me, it makes me cry. I don't know what to say. Millions more people around the world now need food aid fast. The WFP is warning of a global hunger pandemic. This airdrop is for the starving in South Sudan. There's social distancing here, but few other defences in poor countries torn by war. The UN Security Council met virtually to hear how bad it could get. When it ended, the head of the WFP told us of his worst fear.
If we lose our funding or lose supply chain access, we're talking about 30 million people, literally over a few months, could die. That's without putting the new numbers of COVID on top of that. So we are literally looking at biblical proportions of famine, the possibility in anywhere from 10 to 36 countries.
What do you say to donors who say we would want to help the world's poor, but there's hungry people in our own countries, so we can't help you now?
You know, I haven't had a donor yet say we're turning our back on these vulnerable people. They're all saying we're going to do everything we can, but of course they got to stimulate their economies, do what they can, and let's see what happens. Understand that in many places, if we have chaos and destabilization, you could have migration by necessity, you could have destabilization by extremist groups. You'll end up paying for it one way or the other.
In Yemen, no lockdown yet. Millions here already a step away from starvation. To reach them, the UN also says it needs a ceasefire. for all sides to fight the common enemy. In Syria too, war takes its toll. In this poor neighborhood, they queue for WFP aid. Like millions around the world, if they don't receive this daily bread, there's nothing to eat. Lise Doucette, BBC News.
A Royal Air Force plane carrying hundreds of thousands of items of protective equipment for health workers has arrived in the UK from Turkey. The flight was originally due to land on Sunday. It comes as the UK ramps up the hunt for a vaccine, with human trials due to begin in Oxford on Thursday. Andy Moore has this report.
Here at last, the RAF plane loaded with personal protective equipment that's so desperately needed in the UK. It's part of an 80-ton shipment that's said to include 400,000 gowns, one of the items in shortest supply. Ministers said this flight was due to arrive on Sunday. Nobody has been able to give a clear reason why it was delayed. Just some of the thousands of people who have died with coronavirus. In fact, figures from the Office for National Statistics revealed deaths in England and Wales at a 20-year high. The daily figures for hospital deaths showed 823 fatalities reported yesterday, bringing the total to 17,337. It's now believed the peak of hospital deaths was on April the 8th. So the worst of the first wave may be over, but vaccines will be needed to stop the virus spreading again. There's hope on the horizon from 2 trials in this country.
The vaccine from the Oxford project will be trialled in people from this Thursday. In normal times, reaching this stage would take years, and I'm very proud of the work taken so far. At the same time, we'll invest in manufacturing capability so that if either of these vaccines safely works, then we can make it available for the British people as soon as humanly possible.
But the UK is still struggling to source personal protective equipment made here. This car parts maker in Nottinghamshire is reopening today, producing equipment for Ireland.
I don't understand why it's so difficult for people to be getting in touch with companies like ours to make the products here in the UK.
The PPE loaded in Istanbul should be on its way to its various destinations as soon as possible. It will no doubt be much appreciated, but more, much more, is desperately needed. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come. Days before his 100th birthday, cards and messages are flooding in for Captain Tom Moore, who's become a sensation by raising millions for charity.
Mothers can deliver food to your door, but can they bring fist bumps and high fives? Can they cause mini stampedes? Bring you instant hero status? Or turn back time with the turn of a knob? Others can bring you food. We bring you a little more. Delivering happy. McDonald's on Uber Eats.
We've been told that perfect mornings exist for the lucky few. That morning people own the waking hours. But the truth is, mornings belong to all of us. And while your morning might look like this, or even this, your mornings are what you make of them. All it takes is saying yes. Starbucks Morning Yes.
You're with BBC World News. Here are the headlines. President Trump brushes aside opposition to his temporary immigration ban. He insists it's to protect American workers. The UN warns the pandemic could almost double the number of people suffering from acute hunger. Germany's handling of the crisis, with its early mass testing and effective lockdown, has been the focus of international attention. And the world is watching now as the authorities begin to gradually ease some restrictions, which will rely on further testing and contact tracing to ensure the outbreak is kept under control. Our Berlin correspondent Jenny Hill sent this report.
Slowly, cautiously, Germany's feeling its way back to life. schools reopening for exams, small shops back in business. At the same time, more testing and a focus on contact tracing. Every time someone tests positive, public health officials must track down anyone they could have infected.
Of course, it's not always possible to find everyone. We depend on the support and the memory of the infected person. They have to work with us, try to remember who they've had contact with.
It's why the army is helping to test a more high-tech solution. It's hoped a phone app could identify potential chains of infection, but there are concerns about privacy, and the technology is considered at least a month from being ready. In the meantime, Germany's studying its own population, looking for antibodies. The aim to establish the true rate of infection, but also to learn more about how immunity might develop.
You also need to have a better idea clinically. If antibodies are detected, how does it really reflect in terms of protection? And if it reflects in terms of protection, how long will that protection last? And obviously, since we are very early in this stage of the pandemic, we don't know that for sure yet. But this data will be coming in.
Meanwhile, Oktoberfest's annual revelry has been cancelled. Public gatherings are still banned, pubs and restaurants still closed. Germany may have got its outbreak under control, but it's far too soon, warn scientists, to celebrate. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Berlin.
Now, Netflix has seen a surge in subscribers in the first 3 months of the year as lockdowns around the world confine people to their homes. So sign-ups to the streaming giant have so far jumped by almost 60 million. That's far more than the company itself was expecting. Jacqueline Coley is editor of Rotten Tomatoes, said the pandemic has been a game changer for the entertainment industry.
It's really interesting because if you were looking at last fall when Disney Plus came out, Netflix was essentially maybe going to lose a bit of its share. And what ended up happening is now it is the kind of perfect thing for folks who are required to be at home. And these other platforms are all just trying to play catch up, whether it be Peacock, HBO Max, and what was thought to be these sort of new platforms that were going to come and compete with Netflix. On the other side of this, Netflix may be stronger than it ever was as a content provider for at-home viewing.
But the key for Netflix, and as you say, it's very crowded now, you've got Disney Plus, Apple TV, as well as many others, is content, isn't it? And if they cannot film now, if there's severe restrictions on filming new series, new movies, that'll be a problem going forward, won't it?
Yes, it's very interesting. When the Spanish flu hit in the 1918s, the same thing happened to the movie industry, and there were seismic changes that happened with how we view movies post that epidemic. And I think we're going to see the same thing here. I don't know necessarily if it's going to shake out to where Netflix can keep their subscriber numbers up. And there's going to be a big gap in content. So there's going to be several months where a lot of shows are having to take this break now. So they're going to have to push things down with the schedule. I think everyone in Hollywood, even at Rotten Tomatoes, they're having to sort of figure out how they're going to be able to turn what they're doing into a post-coronavirus friendly existence, whether that be craft services or changing your website to focus solely on at-home viewing. I mean, everyone is working as hard as they can to sort of keep and adapt.
And I presume price will be key still, what you're paying to subscribe to Netflix or its competitors, especially if households are feeling under financial pressure.
Yes, I think it will, but it's more of I think there's going to be a finite amount of money that people are going to spend for content. And it's really going to be like, what do you have to have? And if you're someone that's obsessed with Tiger King and you like the fact that every about 6 months to 9 months, Netflix will have a hit like that sort of breaks through on the zeitgeist, it becomes that first thing that you'll say yes to. And maybe something like Apple TV, after the morning show goes off the air, you say, I don't need that. I think it's very much going to be about them keeping content available for folks to go back to. And right on the zeitgeist, it becomes that first thing that you'll say yes to. And maybe something like Apple TV, after the morning show goes off the air, you say, I don't need that. I think it's very much going to be about them keeping content available for folks to go back to. And right
reports.
It may look like Christmas, but this is much bigger than Christmas. It's the morning delivery at Captain Tom Moore's local post office. A Himalayan mountain of cards arriving ahead of his 100th birthday next week.
It's overwhelming, the support that Captain Tom has from the general public. The whole country's behind him. He's such a legend.
Reminiscent of election night, this has become a military-style operation. The cards and parcels.
So heartfelt, and it really shows the effort people have put in. I think he will really appreciate that. I'm going to try and take pictures of many as I can and show them to him, because he will happily sit through and read them all. And it just shows that people really do care about these sort of things, especially in a tough time. I think people really have joined together to make the effort for this.
Well, these are the cards that were opened just yesterday afternoon. There are 3,000 cards here, but today we've seen 30,000 delivered. Who knows? They may even fill this entire hall.
It's a wonderful story at a time where, frankly, everybody needed it. And it's also a real reaffirmation of people's kindness. And I'm a great believer that people are fundamentally kind, and this is just the most wonderful way to show it.
We know that his record-breaking fundraising for NHS charities has touched hundreds of thousands around the world, from the old to the young, such as Melissa Grace. She has Angelman syndrome, a rare genetic disorder of the nervous system. Helped by her brother Jacob, she used her iPad to tell me how she'd been inspired by the war veteran.
I wanted to send Captain Tom a card to help him celebrate his 100th birthday, to show him that I think he is amazing, and his hashtag tomorrow will be a good day is a fabulous message to us all. And for me, he says never give up. You can achieve more than you think.
So, at least 35,000 cards, and more than a week to go until Captain Tom Moore clocks up his 100. Years this time, not laps. But as we know with this man, a total or a target is just a number. John Maguire, BBC News, Bedford.
He is such an inspiration, Captain Tom Moore, who will soon be 100. Thank you for your company here on BBC World News. You can reach me at I'm Sally Bundock BBC, and I'll see you soon.
Hello there. We're seeing